All right. Hey, everybody. Good morning. Saturday, 10 a.m. And you know what that means. It's time for the Science Nights. And you are going to want to buckle in for this one because today the guys are talking all about aliens. Yes, it is fall. It is Halloween time. And we're going to have a lot of fun with this episode because we're talking about the unknown, UFOs, unidentified flying objects. Some others may call it, right? And they were asking me what my UFO story was. So I'm going to kick this one off. We have Dr. Sean Graham, Dr. Anirban Bhattacharjee, and Dr. Thomas Shiller here in the house. And they were asking me, Conley, you got a UFO story for us? And I'm like, yes, I actually do. So I'm going to start it off here today. So guys, check this out. Remember the end of the Mayan calendar. December 21st, I believe, 2012. Okay? And here's something revealing about me, okay? Competitive Magic the Gathering player back then. So I'm actually pretty good, ranked pretty high, but still.
So we're talking modern, standard,
standards. Well, no, actually, Commander? I'm a limited guy. I was a limited guy.
Did Gathering come out then? Was Gathering out at that point?
It was Gathering, yes.
I do it!
No, but anyway.
I only want to know one thing.
What?
What are you guys talking about?
Did you have a girlfriend in high school?
You probably did. You probably did.
No, not really.
Anyway, no.
You played D&D was probably then. You didn't?
No, man, I played football. What are you talking about?
Sure, right. Can you see all? All right, anyway, so we're back to my story here. All right, so December 21st, 2012. Imagine a ping pong ball that is glowing. To me, it's purple, but to other people, it's blue.
Where are we? What's going on?
We're in
the house?
Abilene, Texas.
Driving on the road Texas. At night.
No, we're outside in the middle of town.
In broad daylight?
No, at night.
At night.
It is. Okay, sorry. Yeah, we are at night, and it is. Roughly around 11 o'clock p.m. And just imagine that ping pong ball glowing, emitting a bluish purplish light. And imagine about 500 of those. About 200 feet above us. And I'm outside, and across the street there is a 7-Eleven, and there's a halfway house across that 7-Eleven right down the street from that, right? And then there's the place where I'm at, which is like the store with a big parking lot, big store-like area, right? And I'm seeing these ping pong balls, a few hundred, move in a celestial way. It's almost like they're a swarm. Moving,
going up and down,
You're
using your hands.
I'm using my hands.
It's like oscillating, going up and down in a wave-like fashion.
Okay. Yeah. A few hundred.
Yeah.
And they're glowing. And there's even a YouTube video. You can't really see it too well, but somebody put a YouTube video of that because I ran into the store. I told everybody, come on out. Come on, you got to see this. This is ridiculous. So it's moving from south to north. So it's moving north at a rate of maybe 4 miles an hour, if even that. Very slow, very floating.
That's a very precise math out there you got there, like a 4 miles per hour. But
well, roughly. I mean,
I'm just kidding.
I'm just saying, but anyway, so it's moving overhead. I'm getting everybody outside to look. Everybody comes outside. They look. The people from the halfway house a few blocks down are coming out. I'm hearing them. And then the people from 7-Eleven come out, and they're just looking at it. They're calling each other. They're trying to get videos. 2012 smartphones, like, you had to be, like, super wealthy to have one with a really nice video camera. But there is somebody that had put one up. You can't really see it very well. You just had to be there. And it was just it was the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. I'll never forget it. And one thing that kind of led me to believe and kind of just ponder on what it could have been was Abilene, Texas is known for Dyess Air Force Base. And they do a lot of experiments, and we see a lot of weird things, when I was living there. So there was a lot of hearsay in town, nothing official, no official release, but there were tons and tons of witnesses out there, and I personally couldn't believe it. I've never seen anything close to it since, and that was my only time I really saw an unidentified flying object.
Objects like 200.
It moved like it was a single life form, almost like a dolphin in the sky, right? But there were a few hundred of them making a shape, almost like a swarm, like I'm saying.
Let's clarify a few. So I'm picturing it first when you. And by the way, incredible story. I love it, and I love this stuff. Even like scientists, we're skeptical. None of us here, none of the three of us, I think, are going. Well, there's definitely aliens because we just heard this story. And so there's definitely aliens. From one story, we just get interested and it's cool. Yeah. And I love telling scary stories around a fire, and this stuff's great. But I'm going to try to get some details from you. At first, when you described it, I'm picturing a cloud where there's a bunch of these lights kind of together, braided together, or are they all one after the other in a line? Which one?
I would say. Oh man, it is so hard to describe because I've never seen anything like it. But if you could imagine,
I think what Conley would be would be better is those murmurations of birds we talked about.
Yeah,
where you have one bird's going around.
So more of like a flock.
Yeah, like
a
a
big,
flock.
Thick.
Like a flock. Yeah.
Okay.
And they're a few feet apart. Some of them are more apart, but they're all kind of moving in one kind of motion.
So
there.
What I think 2012 at that time drone technology wasn't that common, right?
Oh yeah, it was.
What
drones?
I mean,
it was just the government at that time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
personal drones.
Personal drones.
Yeah, we're blowing up weddings in Yemen back in 2012.
Yeah.
No
So
doubt.
not without going into that, but I know it's But I was going to say, drones were not in human hand, not human, I mean the public hand, right? What do we...
Yeah, just aliens had them.
Aliens, yeah, aliens. Aliens came and gifted us drones where we could... Okay, so you have, So, you cannot see us, our hand expressions and everything are signifying something else. But what I'm going to say is, you have drones and there's a military base, right, you said, right? I mean, it could have been possible they're trying to do this new formation. If they could fly, 200 drones in exactly one coordinated movement. They would set one command, and all of them would move reflex at the same time.
I think another thing to consider is sometimes, when you see these lights, it's hard to pinpoint how far away they are. So a light that's really far away, like headlights from a car, if you see them 20 miles away, look like a single light, and they do weird things like blink. When they go past a shrub, they suddenly stop and then they pop up again. They make weird effects. The atmosphere has effects on those lights from a distance. So you might have been looking at something that was really far away that seemed like it was right over your head, right? That was only going 4 miles an hour that could have been going Mach 4, right? To me, it sounds almost like, and of course I didn't see it, and I'm having a hard time getting perspective of where exactly it was relative to your vision, but it almost sounds like it could have been tracer fire. Right?
Describe tracer fire.
Tracer, yeah.
Tracer
So if they're shooting like a Gatling gun, 1,000 rounds a second, and they've got those incendiary rounds, and it's really far away. Those things kind of waver a little bit. They kind of glance through the atmosphere, and of course, what you described, I don't think it's not quite right. But that's the kind of thing. Like if you saw a tracer fire from like a big machine gun from a A-10 Warthog or something like that. Those things sail, and they sail forever. And if you saw it and you were driving past a military base, it would look weird. It wouldn't look like. And of course, if you've not been in a military base and hadn't seen that kind of heavy firepower, it might look really weird to you.
What was weird though is it had a beginning, and then it had almost like a body formed out of the flock of all these balls, right, that were glowing. And then it tapered off, too, to have an end. So it looked almost like an entity of all these different balls. And like I say, multiple people saw it, and like you said, they were strung together. And I think it was probably something military. Personally, I don't think it was aliens or anything.
I mean, I personally, as I said, it would most probably be drones. That would be the not drones as per se. Drones being something unique, drones or something. Mm-hmm. Just the coordination of their movements. They were testing it out. How coordinated, like you could have like 200 drones. Like on a target, you want to send 200 exactly coordinated something on.
So
that.
Just a UFO. Unidentified flying object.
I mean,
not necessarily an alien, but a UFO.
Yeah, that's exactly what it means.
Yeah. And we're going to definitely want to distinguish between, because we're going to be talking about both today. We're going to talk about just standard
UFOs,
unidentified flying objects, in which I think yours falls under. Nobody thinks that it was an alien. But then we'll also talk about aliens, and we'll talk about the possibility of other life in the universe and that kind of thing. That's all we're going to kind of talk about today. We're going to get into this, discussing all kinds of stuff. And I think you mentioning, Conley, the military base makes me think of Project Blue Book, which is a really cool thing that you can. I remember reading about this stuff and found this book in the library, and it's the U.S. Air Force's investigations of UFOs in like the 50s and 60s. It was, after the Roswell incident, which was an incident. I mean, the Air Force doesn't deny that something landed out near Roswell back in, I guess, 1947. But all of that, that kind of started the craze of the flying saucers, right? And the movies started coming out, and it was just this big thing and people were pressing the Air Force saying, "Hey, you guys have got to investigate this." It was kind of a form of mass hysteria. And so they did. They got scientists and they got their top aircraft people, and they went through case by case. Anytime a UFO was reported, they would go and hound and talk to the local people. And it's really cool to me. It's fun to read. It's really interesting. Of course, if you're like super paranoid and you're a conspiracy theorist, you're just going to think it's all the Air Force is covering everything up.
And one thing I do want to point out, because you two, to be noticed, like you have grown up in United States, right? And I did not grow up in the United States. If you have not noticed it by now. So
I thought you grew up in Kansas.
Yes. The shuttle landed in Kansas.
It's an obvious Kansas accent.
Yes. And I was adopted by this couple. And you know how the story goes, right?
You're an alien.
Yeah, exactly. And I can look into the next room, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, stuff. No, I mean, it's very weird for me, right? Why are these UFO sightings in the United States at such a high frequency? Like, compare it to India, we don't really have that many people coming and saying, "Oh yeah, I saw this weird light in the sky and it's an alien." It has to be one. Like, to me, that's what it's like. I think it's mostly to do with United States, like, experimenting with like new types of like army and being in the forefront of this. I mean, it's not a secret that the United States has like tons of investment in the army, which is greater than any nation on earth. So their research goes in there. I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, I think Sean made a good point too, that because of Area 51 and because of Roswell, we have this cultural thing where people are paranoid about it. They think that UFOs are constantly buzzing around above our heads. So if they see anything anomalous, it's an alien. It's a spacecraft.
And that's exactly what I was referring to. It happened in the United States because the research in these kind of technologies were more advanced than anywhere else on the earth. Mm-hmm. So the chances of getting a weird-looking aircraft crashing would be in the United States.
And the big hysteria in the Project Blue Book, speaks to all of what you guys are talking about. And it's not just the aircraft and the experimental stuff. They mention that they kind of map all of the sightings that they thought were credible, where people actually saw something and they couldn't explain it, UFOs, and something like 95% of them happened within like 10 miles of an Air Force base. So it was just like, boom,
Yeah.
there you go. That's the explanation. But then going to it further, which is more interesting, and which I think people really need to know about, is they talked about the hysteria, which is something humans are capable of. And this was the kind of more troubling aspect of Project Blue Book. It wasn't that, they were hiding monsters at Area 51, or that people were seeing their, experimental spy planes crashing left and right. They were seeing stuff. They were seeing afterburner from weird jet aircraft, when jet aircraft, nobody even knew what jet aircraft were in the 40s, right? We just kind of invented them, and they started flying them around, so they start getting weird. They made weird aircraft that looked like flying saucers, right? Flying wing type designs.
Like, exactly. Like, if you take at like 1945, 1950s, around that time, and this remote area, this person who only knows airplane, which looks like a standard airplane, like a 20-seater Cessna or something like
and
that,
then
right?
an SR-71 Blackbird goes over.
Yeah, and then you have
Mach 5.
Yeah,
not just
that
Mach
looks
5.
like an alien.
Yeah, like
Shit.
And those things they were flying those over
And you
the
have a
Soviet
B-2,
Union in
yeah.
the 50s.
and you have a B-2 bomber or something completely
Yeah.
black like that flying over you. You're like, what
Yeah.
is it? So
The mass hysteria part's
and
really
the army
interesting,
will not
though.
tell you because it's secret.
Right, they
yeah,
can't. They can't.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of in a bind. They're like, look, we can tell you guys, and then we'd all of a sudden the Ruskies would know all of our
Yeah.
tricks. But the mass hysteria part was a really interesting part about it, because in many cases, there would not be multiple sightings of weird incidences and really weird stuff. Like, there's this great story in there about these noises that people were hearing somewhere up in Oregon, and they'd hear these things going over their heads, and there was this beeping noise. This is like beep, 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 beep. And people were hearing these all over town, and as soon as it hit the newspaper, right, that they're hearing weird things and there's unidentified flying objects, then people started saying that they were being taken. Then they started seeing monsters, right? But only when there was media involved. As soon as it hit the newspapers, then there were abductions. And what it was, they brought in ornithologists, and it was a saw-whet owl. Owls make a specific kind of owl make a very mechanical beeping noise, and that flying overhead.
What's the name you said? Sorry.
Saw-whet owl.
Saw-whet
That's a kind, and they winter. You can find them around here in the winter time, but they breed in the northern parts in kind of dark rainforest type habitats often. But this is another example, Conley, like what you're talking about. They're flying overhead, and it's a weird mechanical noise they're not familiar with, only certain times a year, and so they kind of show up, right? They're coming in migration, they show up, and they're flying overhead, and it sounds to them like they're 20,000 feet. It sounds like some crazy aircraft way overhead, but it's really flying directly overhead, like at the height of their house. But they can't tell because it's dark. Right? They don't see the thing, obviously, or they'd say it's just an owl. But the crazy thing, again, the scary part is how people just made stuff up after it became a media event. They wanted to get their picture taken. They wanted to be in the newspaper, so they lied.
Well, you also mentioned something else there, that this sort of thing happens at night, just like Conley's story. And I don't know about you guys, but I've done some camping by myself, or I've been places by myself at night. The human mind does weird things when you're by yourself and you can't see what's going on around you. So imagine you have all of these people who hear weird things like that owl, and maybe they're alone, they're out in the dark, they can't see anything. Maybe they've had some beers or something. You can, I mean, just disgraceful. But maybe these weird noises in their mind, in that state of mind, sounds like a alien spacecraft or something.
So, to bring it back, I mean, when we come back from the break, I'm going to talk about a little bit more about the mass hysteria and how that affects our thinking and how we can easily get pursued into. So, for example, I do not believe in aliens, but I can be made to believe in aliens because if there are like 20 people around me, I'm saying, well, there are aliens around me. And we'll talk about that.
Yeah, how does that happen?
Mentality.
Mob mentality.
How do you get convinced?
And we will talk about that.
That's very important.
When we get back.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's the Science Nights. We're here talking about aliens, UFOs, and that sort of thing, that sort of phenomena. And where we left off, I was mentioning that Project Blue Book, really cool read if you can find it. I'm sure you can. Lots of stories in it and kind of analyses of different things that people thought they saw back in the 50s and 60s. Most of it was just, people seeing weird lights near Air Force bases, which you can kind of expect. But the really cool thing, again, was a lot of times as soon as the media got hold of stories about seeing the UFOs, then people started coming out of the woodwork with stories. And a lot of it was probably just people wanting attention, that sort of thing. But there's a certain aspect of mass hysteria that I think is a really important, kind of more interesting take-home message of the Project Blue Book investigations by the U.S. Air Force. And so, Anirban, why don't you tell us about the kind of classic experiment in mass hysteria
this is amazing
of all time?
I mean, let's set this up with a little bit of the background to this, and everybody knows this. So let's go back 30 years before the incident, 32 years before, turn of the century, 1900 San Francisco, right? You have this earthquake. Massive earthquake, right? You already have the setting where the city is completely devastated, follows by a World War One in 10 years and later. Then you have another thing happening which people don't really remember is the Spanish influenza, Spanish flu, which decimated more than 1 million to 2 million.
1918, right?
Not this one. I was talking during World War One also that went around.
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident around that time.
Yeah.
So government hid it, the Spanish flu, the effect of how many people were dying, and they kind of trying to lower the numbers down. But later when it came out, that was a big deal. Then you have right around 1930s this time. Coming around to 1930s.
So a lot of this is kind of first time kind of period where worldwide there were big news stories about a lot of people dying, a lot of catastrophe, World War One, Spanish flu,
and then you have 1935 people. 1930s you have the Great Depression, and everything coming into play. The people are already in a position. They're not it's not like a safe, a good times kind of thing.
Everybody's freaked out.
Basically freaked out. And then you have 1939 broadcast of the War of the Worlds, and where Orson Welles basically goes with this broadcast, and he reads it in a way as if the invasion from aliens have landed and they're invading Earth. Now, one of the critical things people actually think is well, yeah, he did it and it's very believable, but the setup was he actually said before the broadcast, a news bulletin came and it said there were flashes of lightning or something like that seen from Mars. 2-3 days ago in the broadcast, the news bulletin, it comes.
So they kind of wait, was that before the actual World of the Worlds? Did they cut into the show that was before it to make this fake kind of commercial?
Yeah, a fake news bulletin that came across.
First fake news,
right before the broadcast or whatever started. It wasn't even called a broadcast or something.
So it's foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing. They said this news bulletin where these people have seen, and then they start this thing, and they come with this thing where they see this strange objects.
And so it's done in a very documentary type style, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard pieces of it, and
people
it's
thought it was real.
Yeah, it's we're getting a news, we're getting a news story out of New Jersey.
Yes.
This all happens in New Jersey, which is incredible.
They run out of their rooms.
Back when New Jersey, had any space for aliens to land, so they sent a reporter out there, and he's like, and then all of a sudden he's like. It cuts off. Right?
Yeah.
It's incredible.
And they also, before that, say the police went to approach the aliens with a flag of truce and everything.
Yeah.
It's and they just kept on reading off excerpts from the novel, and people started running out of the house, and
people were freaking out.
End times.
And isn't that amazing? You think about what would it take to pull something like that off now? Actually, honestly.
Guys, I'm sorry. There's some bright lights. I'm sorry.
Those are cars.
We're going to have to cut off.
We're going to have to cut off. I'm going to go investigate.
There's a strange light out there in New Jersey, and we're going to send our best man out there to report on it. So I'm thinking, all right, so one thing you got to consider, when the first movies were projected, there's a famous one of a train that's coming coming towards the camera and it's at an angle. So somebody just went out and shot a train coming into a station, and it's not even coming directly towards the camera or towards the audience. It's coming at an angle, and yet the first time they showed that in a movie house, people were ducking. They were like freaking out. Holy crap, a train! And it's obvious. Like, to us, it seems so stupid.
No, for you,
and it's the same thing in 1939, a radio broadcast?
Not 1939. Like, taking, like in India, right? I've heard the stories from my grandmother, right? My grandmothers, when they were growing up, and this is like their first-hand account of them seeing, is like their relatives who came from villages and went to watch the movie, came out of the movie because it was raining in the movie. They're like, we need to go home. It was raining right there. So they left the movie theater because of that. So,
wow.
So, yeah.
So it can still happen now.
But I think it's easy. But this would be like a thought experiment. What would be
At first I thought, if we'd had this discussion 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I'd be like, there's no way we could pull something like that off again, because I'd be thinking about like TV with digital effects or something like that. But now we're in the age of fake pictures on the web. And we are suffering from this right now. My students cannot tell what is real and what isn't. Anything that's on the internet, they have the slightest shred of skepticism about just about anything on the web. They hear anything, a little meme with a couple of things that are factual on it, or presumably factual, they buy it. They buy it right away, especially if it reinforces what they already believe.
Well, that brings up a good point, too. We think about modern media. I don't have cable, but we can watch shows like on Hulu and Netflix and stuff like that. And there's a show called Ancient Aliens. And it's hilarious. We watch it because it's funny. Now, my wife and I are both scientists, and we think it's hilarious. But the way all this stuff is presented, now that we have a society where information is everywhere, you can go look things up, they present it as science. So it's almost infuriating in a way how these shows are presented. Because they have these supposed scientists on the show. They call them astronaut theorists, using the word theory.
So we should stop right here. Doesn't it frustrate you when we use the word theory instead of saying it's a hypothesis or an idea? It's just like
it frustrates me more than you can ever imagine.
I mean, it's just like, can I tear my hair, all my remaining hair out?
Yeah, just real quick, a scientific theory isn't the same thing as what you. Like, I have a theory that my brother stole my banana.
Yeah.
It's not like that. So when people say, "Oh, it's just a theory," a scientific theory is something else. It's a big thing.
Yeah, you have observed something happening. You have a model to explain that those observations.
And it's not just one thing either. It's
multiple.
it's a huge segment of the cosmos that's being explained by lots of observations, and it's been tested a bunch of times.
And then you take that particular model, which is still an idea, and then you predict the future behavior from it. And if that works out, then it's a scientific theory.
Yeah.
If your model fails, it's not a scientific theory.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or if you go on History Channel and claim to be an astronaut theorist, anything you say is a theory.
I have a theory that
I have a theory.
There were aliens at Roswell. That's not the same thing. And that figures in here because people can't distinguish what's really science and what isn't. They don't have the slightest shred of skepticism when it comes to some random thing that somebody sends them on the internet. Pictures of giant snakes, pictures of blue whale, and I want to know. There's one going around everywhere now of a blue whale under a bridge.
Oh God, yeah,
right? And it makes it look. It's like we're more savvy when it comes to that thing. But and we're old. We shouldn't be savvy at that sort of thing. Our students aren't. They're supposed to be the tech savvy generation, and they can't easily spot a Photoshop job. And it's like, what I want to know is who is benefiting from making these stupid memes with fake
And what's
images.
the reason? Why do you care? Like,
I mean, in some cases it's political. We won't
Yeah,
get into that.
yeah.
But in
But
other cases, it's
this
just a
blue
random
whale-
picture of a blue whale on a bridge.
Oh.
They're big enough as it is. You don't have to make them 6 times bigger.
Maybe it's the aliens doing it to break down our
Yeah,
society.
and you remember there's another picture.
I
of
have a
this,
theory.
Like,
You want to hear my theory?
no,
Just
your
real quick.
hypothesis.
My
Your
hypothesis.
idea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I did that on purpose. It was supposed to be funny. But my hypothesis is that somehow people make those memes and they're attached to some outfit and they determine who is gullible
Enough.
by who reposts them. And then they try to sell them stuff, either political stuff or they try to sell them garbage.
And
Or maybe it's just
I
entertaining.
think that's what it is.
Maybe they get a kick
They
out
might,
of it,
and
like
that's
Orson
that's
Welles.
documented. There's a couple people who put out fake news, literal fake news, and they hunted them down. They tracked down the URL and then knocked on their door and said, "Hey, why are you doing this?" And
LOL.
that's what it was. They were like,
It's
"We
just
wanted to see
fun.
who would fall for it."
Yeah.
yeah.
were you going to say something, Thomas?
Oh, I was just going to talk more about ancient aliens.
Oh, go ahead. Like, we are talking about aliens here.
Yeah.
This is an alien show.
Yeah, so when there's nothing else to watch on Saturday night, we tune into Ancient Aliens, and it's just incredible. The people on the show, they will connect anything, whether it
To
be
aliens.
biology, geology, archaeology, history, whatever, to
Numbers.
aliens.
They do numerology.
Oh yeah. Sure. Yeah.
See, because
Everything.
eight is 2 4s together, and 2 4s together is
Is
two,
two-
is 4 2s together, and that's an inverse.
Yeah,
and that's why Tupac Shakur is still alive.
And plus, eights look
Because
like
it's got, like, two.
spaceships.
And
but it's presented as science, which is the funny and kind of frustrating thing. They talk about the pyramids. They talk about the extinction of the dinosaurs. That's one where I almost
Uh-oh.
threw something at the TV.
They're on
because
your turf.
They're on my turf, yeah. And apparently aliens had something to do with the extinction of the dinosaurs.
And another thing we do, actually, on a more serious note, we do have to understand when we are talking about people in olden days, like talking about certain mythical creatures and stuff like that. And I think you and I might have talked about this, Sean, and maybe Thomas, I don't remember exactly. Think about this. You have this, if you look at ships, right, the olden days of ships, like Mayflower and everything else of that, or the ship that Magellan went around the world, they are not really that big. They are not that big. Now, these are the top-notch ships that you have out there. And these are going across oceans over a multi-month voyage, like over a 1-2 month period. Now, let's think about something closer to home, like let's say you're going out of England, but not going too far, just going to Iceland. Your ship's going to be much smaller, much cramped, and you have a giant squid showing up. To you, that looks huge, and it's a kraken right there. Like you're on a boat somewhere, like a small boat, and you're fighting, and immediately it seems like, okay, it's maybe 10 feet, but you think it's like 50 feet big, with like 1,000 arms attacking you. So I would suggest people need to put themselves right at that
Yeah.
point.
Well, there have been a lot of phenomena historically, explained through mythological things. We go back to Greek and Roman mythology.
Absolutely.
Volcanoes.
Lightnings.
That's Vulcan,
Yeah.
guy, the fire god. I guess our modern theology is rooted in these mythologies. But I guess people, when they see anomalous lights in the sky, they go to
this,
space aliens.
Yeah, and because you do not know what is unknown out here, so you want to fill the gap in, because none of us are out there thinking, people do not want to say that I do not know. It's like a kind of thing, immediately a reflex reaction. You want to know, so you want to fill in the gap in your information. So
Especially
immediately-
scientists. It's
Yeah.
incredibly frustrating to us. The listeners could probably tell that when we were trying to figure out what the hell was going on with Conley when he saw all these lights. It's got to be drones. It's got to be.
Our brains are just rattling
So, yes.
possible things.
No, but so what we do is like we make up one of the things we should be able to do more is tell people that I do not know. I'm sorry. It's okay
Yeah.
that I do not
We
know.
have to learn that as
Yes.
scientists.
As a scientist, you have to do. But I'm saying in general public, it's okay not to know and not being able to explain something
To a certain extent.
certain
Yeah.
extent.
Because, like,
yes.
if you're asking me, like, if someone says, "Hey, I saw the Aztec god Tezcatlipoca in my backyard last week," I'd be like, I don't have to be agnostic about that.
Yeah.
That person's nuts.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk, though, next in our next segment after a quick break. We're
I
going to talk about real aliens.
We're going to talk about little green men, and I'm going to bring it back because I can bring this to paleontology. Trust me, just like everything else.
I love to see it.
So we'll talk about that when we come back. All right, welcome back. We're the Science Knights. Now, if you've listened to the show before, you know I'm a paleontologist, and we may discuss topics that are not really connected to paleontology at all. Space aliens being one of them. But I'm going to connect it with paleontology, just like I do with a lot of things. So, when I was a kid, I had a book about dinosaurs, and there was a page.
Jurassic Park?
It wasn't Jurassic Park. It was like one of these zoo books or something.
Okay.
And there was a page devoted to a specific dinosaur called Troodon. This is a little meat-eating dinosaur that lived during the Cretaceous. The interesting thing about Troodon is it had, relative to its body size, the largest brain case of any dinosaur. So presumably a pretty intelligent dinosaur. By dinosaur standards, that's not very intelligent. But this was enough for some of these astronaut, quote-unquote, theorists to take it and run with it and suggest that Troodon did not go extinct, but rather it evolved into a sapient organism. Dino sapiens, as they call them. This was a legit thing, and they managed to escape from Earth before the extinction event. And these are the little green men that people see when aliens abduct them.
Hold on, this is just like those the Doctor Who people, like Silurian man, which lives underneath.
Sleestaks.
Yeah, they're the Sleestaks. Yeah, lizard people.
Well, I'm sure there was an actual paleontologist who theorized what a humanoid dinosaur would look like and made it like a sculpture of it.
Yeah, and
I'm
that's
sure
what
that
was
didn't
in my
help
book.
No. That's what you saw. Yeah. Wow, little green men are dinosaurs. Well, we're for the last segment of the show, we're gonna talk about. There is actually a field of science, and it's actual science, that kind of looks into possible life forms on other worlds.
Like how,
astrobiology.
Yeah.
It's a really cool field, actually. They do a lot of neat things. It's kind of an interdisciplinary field, which is kind of the way we do things on our show. Lots of different people can participate from different fields. And so there's biologists who will study like life forms on Earth in extreme conditions to inform what life on other planets might be like.
And they would do it on, like they have been doing it on, like going much further back in time. They have done it on Mir. They did it on, now they're doing it on International Space Station. Like trying to go.
They're taking life forms up into space and looking at growth habits and that. That's and of course planetary people would try to study other planets to look at conditions that might occur.
To do that, and before we get into that, we should also make sure, like I think all three of us know this, but we should like tell our audience, what does life actually mean for us? It's not, at the first glance, it is not us walking around or intelligent life form or cows.
That's
and
very
important
to talk about. So we're going to talk about the probability of finding life on other worlds, and when we say that, we're not talking about Troodon man. We're not talking about Sleestaks. To the probability of finding intelligent life or intelligent civilizations, we're going to talk about the actual probabilities here in a second. It's low, but the probability of finding life of any kind is actually not as low, and it's pretty. That's the more interesting question, and it is still a very fundamental question. We're talking about like microbes, just like a little bacteria. If we found a little bacteria on another planet, that would say a lot. It would say a lot. It would be very interesting.
Basically, we need something that is able to take in raw minerals and use that to produce energy and reproduce.
The key thing there, I think, is reproduction, because there could be weird phenomena, weird chemistry on other planets where things take things in, where you could have growth it could look like growth on another planet, and you might be fooled by it, like a little crystal growing. Just growth doesn't tell you, but if it makes copies of itself and it's made of matter.
Yes.
Then probably you got yourself a life form.
That's what I'm saying. Like
it might be able to get you. It might be able to get you if it can reproduce.
You can synthesize like raw material and make copies of itself.
Yeah. The copies part is super important.
We've found organisms like this on Earth. The study I'm familiar with, and I actually got to sit in on a presentation about this, is some scientists were doing work out in the Atacama Desert, which is one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. Incredibly high temperatures, very little water.
We
like
test our
zero.
Mars rovers and everything out there.
It's like a Martian landscape.
Yeah.
And scientists in beneath like thin layers of salt, halite, found bacteria growing. In the most inhospitable conditions we can imagine on Earth,
Yeah.
there was life.
Yeah, underneath like salt slabs of salt, and it's the crucial. I always bring up the Atacama Desert when I talk about life, because the only place on Earth where you can go and get a negative value for life, really, is the Atacama Desert in certain areas where it's so dry. You can go to the deepest hydrothermal vents, the bottom of the ocean, deep chambers, deep underground, and caves, high up into the atmosphere, and you're going to find water vapor, and you're going to find life in all of those places. The one place on Earth where they practice the Mars rovers, they practice their instruments because they want to get an instrument that can give them they want a place on Earth where they can get a negative with their life detecting instruments, and it's the only place they can go.
I mean, that would
it's
be
so dry.
One, the Atacama Desert. One of the most inhospitable would be right up in South Pole. Would be another place because you don't have a whole lot of water vapor in the atmosphere. You need to have liquid water. That's
Even places in Antarctica on the ice, you can find little things growing there.
So looking at other celestial bodies potentially, what's the likelihood?
So that's
and first. So what we're looking for is liquid water.
Liquid water.
Liquid water.
Because that's the best place to do your chemical reactions. Because as we know, we need to have chemical reactions to happen, and water is the best place to have it.
Like we were just saying, like ice works kind of for life, but it would have to have kind of started in liquid water and then moved on to the ice.
Like a slushy mixture kind of thing.
It would have had to have started in liquid water and then gotten into the atmosphere. You need that liquid water as like a starting point. So in the solar system, where do we have liquid water?
So we would have liquid water on Mars. We would have liquid water.
And that's only recently been established, right?
3-4
it trickles
years,
like little seepages.
Yeah,
on
like
Mars.
you would think wet sand, and it kind of goes away as it tilts in a different direction and it approaches
Which
again.
is just incredible to me.
So you have that.
We've only recently discovered that. I got the great images of the water shooting out from the bottom of these hills. And it flashes back and forth as I guess is it a daily thing that
no, I
when
think
it heats up during the day
it's
or
over
seasonal?
months. Yeah,
it's
seasonal thing.
How interesting.
And another very interesting thing also on Mars, we have found lakes on Mars which are covered on the top with ice, but the lake underneath has water, but this water is extremely high salt content, like a brine. Because brine freezes at a much lower temperature than normal water would. Like as Thomas just said, like in Atacama Desert under a layer of salt, you would see life. So there is a possibility there might be life in that salty water out there, underneath the.
Especially if it was ever a lot of water there to begin with, right?
Yes,
and it's just gone away, which is possible.
Yeah,
right?
which is possible, and definitely we have evidence that Mars has a lot of water, and I'm pretty sure Thomas
in the past,
the sedimentary
flowing
features,
water.
Flowing water.
I'm going to go out. Listeners will love this. I'm going to say a bold statement here. Here's a prediction. Here's a theory. If there was ever a lot of water, liquid water on Mars, and life started there, it's still there. That's my prediction.
Well, we will have to find out when you can go there.
Somewhere. And those little seepages under that
Deep
ice, somewhere down in the crust.
Cave or something.
If it ever got started, there's still some of it there. We just got to find it.
So one's there, and then we have the Jupiter's planet Europa, which is completely covered with ice on the top, and it has like liquid water underneath, or like some kind of slushy. We'll have liquid water there. Then we have the moon of Saturn, which is Titan, and there's another moon of Saturn called Enceladus, which is all as liquid water coming out of it. And Titan is even more relevant is because it's got this hugely complex atmosphere of methane and everything. So, and there are lightning, you can see lightning passing through in Titan. So what it does, it is actually having a chemical reaction, because you need lightning and you need that to have chemical reactions to produce life. So, or like
some of the early experiments to establish where amino acids came from. They put a bunch of gases and raw material, carbon, in a little gas chamber, and then flashed it with electricity,
Absolutely.
and you got practically all the amino acids you need that are basis of life from that experiment. And so what's going on in Titan's atmosphere is like that experiment,
At a very low temperature.
but at a global scale.
At a
like
global
big,
scale,
Big, it's the
big
biggest
scale.
moon, right?
Yeah, it's the biggest moon, but only thing that might be hindering life at this point would be the temperature.
Mm-hmm.
So as the sun becomes a red giant, little bit, not a red giant, it will become bigger, then slowly, then Titan's going to
Or
heat
like
up.
just an off chance that since it's at a really cold temperature, we talked about weird things that happen at cold temperatures with superfluids.
Yeah.
So off chance that Titan is so cold that it actually creates some weird conditions where life could evolve under
That would
separate
be very
circumstances.
strange. I don't
It'd
think
be
we
very
can.
weird.
We have
Yeah.
no idea. Like,
That's the kind of
because
experiment that could be done. Is
on
like,
Saturn.
well, in a lab, right? Create the pressure.
Yeah,
and the
but you'll
cold
also
conditions.
have to wait for a long time. You have to have
Oh
a
yeah,
lot of.
I'm not saying setting up an
yeah,
experiment for life to occur.
Yeah, so
but see
some-
what organic molecules do under those
So
circumstances.
a cold little pond instead of a warm little pond.
Yes.
Yeah.
With lightning.
So where else? Where else in the solar system?
So you would have that Enceladus, and you would have Mars and like Titan. These are the 3-4 areas that we are.
So
very,
roughly, out of all the worlds in the solar system, what is that? Like a quarter, ballpark, 25%, 10%.
Well, would you be, because there are, like, if you take Titan into account, then Jupiter has 4 moons. You have to take into account. There's Triton, and
Yeah,
there's,
about the
like,
same size. Just give me a ballpark. Give me a ballpark.
I
No.
would say 10%.
Okay. Now we can plug that number into an equation,
Yeah.
the Drake equation.
So now the Drake equation comes into play. What you do is find out is, first of all, you take how many stars are there in the planet. Sorry, not in a planet. That would be weird. In a galaxy. You
How
take
many
a
stars are there in the galaxy?
in our galaxy? So
And
that's
we
close
can
to
put a
trillion.
number on that.
Trillion
So,
stars.
Good.
Now, out of the trillion stars, how many of them can we think of having planetary systems, having like solar, like planets around it?
Yeah, and we get a rough estimate of that from the number of exoplanets we've discovered,
So
right?
what we can say is, at least we can definitely put a number on that. We can say, on the very conservative estimate, would be like a quarter at least. You
Okay.
can put like at least. So it bring it down to like 250 billion. Right
Okay.
there.
And then of those stars that have planetary systems,
Now-
how many of those planetary systems have planets in the habitable zone? Is
So
that the next thing?
yeah. So if we go by our own Earth, right, that is only one planet out of 8, right?
Right.
So that makes it what, like close to 10%, as I said.
Yeah.
So now immediately up to 250.
And the exoplanet data kind of supports that too, right?
Pretty close
About
to
10% of
yeah.
the known ones so far.
So
right?
then we can bring it down to like a 20 billion planets right
and
now.
then of those planets in the habitable zone, how many have water? That's 100% for ours, but that's not how the Drake equation works.
So that will not how the Drake because you need liquid water, because habitable zone means
Oh, right.
0 to 100, so
Yeah.
all the way. So you would need to have a place where things would occur. So now the question is, out of them, so how many would actually have liquid water which can have life? So you bring it down, and I would suggest, like, if you start doing that, would be like another 10%.
another 10%.
And this Carl Sagan came down to the idea would be we would at least have like 2 to 3 million planets out there which could sustain life out there with
so
that number.
If you plug all those numbers
So-
in, which we actually have hard data for,
So-
and spit out the number, the
So-
numbers of potentially habitable worlds are actually a lot.
Yeah, you can have
No,
life. Yeah.
that doesn't mean any of them are anywhere near us, but there's a lot. There's
Yeah,
a lot.
but
There's a
also-
good chance.
But at the same time, when we talk about an intelligent life, that we talk about as Fermi paradox, is basically then either we have to contact the intelligent life when they are able to communicate with us, or we should we should be contacted by somebody during our time that we knew what we are dealing with. So I would say intelligent life form as we know it would be around like what, 30,000-40,000 years, would you say that, or even lower? What would you say?
How long has intelligent life been on Earth?
Yeah, like for like as humans from a
To be,
perspective.
to be able to receive a message that was
Understand,
not like
not just like to understand that these people are not humans.
okay, yeah. So maybe a million years on
Would you
Earth.
say that? I was
Yeah.
going for like 30,000-40,000
No,
years.
I think a million years ago you'd have had some sort of human-like creature that had been like, that ain't us.
That it is.
Yeah.
You would agree with that, Thomas, because
Yeah.
you guys are more that. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hominids.
So maybe at that time, but the records wouldn't come to us, right? We wouldn't
Yeah.
have written
Yeah.
records.
But like if it had been a million years ago and they'd sent a radio broadcast,
We wouldn't have-
They wouldn't have got it.
yeah.
That would have had to have been
100
60
years.
years ago.
60 years ago,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's the thing. It's like the time frame is so small.
Yeah, so it's fleeting.
It's very fleeting.
And the chances of an actual intelligent civilization
Arising.
that's only been past 10,000 years on Earth.
Yeah,
And
with
that-
written records and
yeah,
stuff. And
yeah.
like we can arise and fall down. And by the time we fall down, people might visit us. Or
Yeah.
we might visit
They'd
them.
miss
and
us. They could miss us.
We could miss them.
So the
So-
chances of there being any life in the universe, pretty good. Might just be a microbe, might be a protist, might be a little bitty bacteria that can get you. But the chances of there being intelligent life in the universe, very small.
Us
And
meeting them.
I'm going to go way on a limb here and say that there's a 100% chance that we've not been visited yet.
Yep, I would agree.
Except by Troodon, man. He's been here. And he's coming back.
Well, that's our show, everybody. Thank you for listening. We're going to be back again with some more scary stuff. We're the Science Knights. Good night or good morning, depending on your paradox.